Aaron Lovejoy here again for Nights at the Game Table. And today we're going to delve into the world of actually airbrushing with actual colors on actual models. So here we go. There's lots of different kinds of paints that you can use for airbrushing. They have pre-made paints. Citadel came out with a really cool air line. And technically this paint is pre-mixed, already ready for your airbrush. This works great for a lot of reasons. It's quick, it's easy. The problem with this type of paints for me is I don't know when they become not airbrush ready. So maybe 6 months after I've gotten the bottle, maybe it's a little too thick to airbrush. So I kind of prefer to mix my own paints. You can use any kind of paints. There's paint from Nocturna, there's paint from Game Color, Reaper, P3, they all work great through your airbrush. In fact, you can pretty much airbrush any kind of acrylic paints through your airbrush. And to mix these paints, I have a secret, ultra secret formula that's not so secret because everyone uses it anyways. Basically, I use isopropyl alcohol. You want to use the 70%. Up to 90% is probably the best. So it's isopropyl alcohol mixed with distilled water. So what I do is I mix 1 part isopropyl alcohol to 9 parts water, distilled water. So that gives me my mix. Isopropyl alcohol actually destroys paint. So you don't want to use too much of it, but at 1:9 ratio, it works fine. Basically what it does is it cuts the paint without having to use water with it. So I can use less of this dilution than I would use of the standard water putting it into the paint. That's important to me because when you buy your bottle of paint, it is at 100% of what that pigment can do on your model. So if you want a really bright color or you just want a truer color to what you're mixing, at 100% it will spray the best for that color. The problem is it probably won't spray out of your airbrush because it does need to be thin. So I use a little bit of my thinning solution, and I usually try to do about 30% thinning solution to 70% paint. And what this does is I've only thinned the paint by 30%. This will give me much more pigment to build up color more quickly and go faster. And that's what we all want when we're painting miniatures, especially armies. We want to go fast. If you thin it too much, you're going to have to put it on layer after layer after layer of color just to build it up to the color that you want. The other types of paint that I use to my airbrushes is called ink. And this game ink from Vallejo, you can also get Daler-Rowney, Liquitex, they all make great inks. They come in a lot of different colors. Inks are awesome for 2 reasons. Mainly they work great in shadows. And the reason they work great in shadows is because they're semi-gloss paint. Semi-gloss paint is slightly shiny. And the slightly shiny color allows light to bounce through the color more easily, and so it creates a deeper, darker color in your shadows. It can be used in your midtones too to bump up your color and make more saturated color. So I like inks for that reason. The other reason is they don't clog your airbrush, or they don't clog it very quickly. Not like acrylic paints, which clog airbrushes really fast. So I use my inks in my Sotar 2020. Almost exclusively. I rarely put regular acrylics in my Sotar 2020. Now, for my regular paints, airbrush ready paints, and regular acrylic paints, I'm using my Patriot 105. It's a general purpose airbrush, and it's perfect for spraying thicker paints with, and it won't clog nearly as much. So, to thin my paints, I'm going to take a little salsa cup or medicine cup, and I'm going to put a little bit of my paint into that cup. So shake it up real good. Grab a big number 8 hobby brush. The bigger the brush, the better, because you can grab more paint. And I'll just sort of transfer in a few brushfuls of paint into my cup. So I want to try to put a little bit more paint than I think I'm going to need for the job. So it always sucks when you start airbrushing and you're almost done and then you run out of paint. That's no good. With that, I've got my thick paint straight out of the bottle in my brush. If you notice on the side of the cup, when I push on it, the paint stays on top of the bristles. No matter how many times I do this, the paint always sticks on top of those bristles. So that tells me that the paint is too thick to airbrush. So how thin should I go? I'm gonna spray a little bit of my thinning solution into a cup, and I'm just gonna start mixing in brushfuls of that to my paint. And I'll really mix it around, really, really good. I'm gonna get it good and mixed into my color. So I mix that around. I'm gonna do a test. So I'll get most of my paint out of my brush and then pull it up. Pull it up on the side of the cup. And what I wanna see my bristles cut through the paint. So the paint's almost going up and down through the bristles freely, and that will tell me that my paint's thin enough. I think I need a little bit more thinner. So I'll just add a little bit more. I like doing this method because it lets me control the thickness of my paint perfectly. So, get some paint on the brush, and I'm just looking at the bristles going through. I think that's just about right. I can see my paint cutting through the bristles. So I know this paint's ready to airbrush. Now, if I put it in my pot and it comes out speckly or it doesn't come out at all, I know that maybe I'm a little bit too thick. I'm gonna go ahead and thin out my other color, because we're gonna go ahead and spray this Space Marine that I've got here kind of as a Blood Angel type color. So I've got a mid-tone, which is my red. I'm gonna need a highlight color, which is this orangey red from Nocturna. It's called Orange Rust. Put that in my cup. So this is my highlight color. I'm gonna need far less of it than I have of the red. So I'll just put a little bit of it in. And I'll just mix in some of my thinning solution. So again, I just want it to be just barely thin enough to airbrush. And I like to mix up my cups really, really well, because even with brand new paint, there'll be little flecks of dried up pigment, stuff that hasn't mixed in. And if you can really, really mix this in, the isopropyl alcohol will help cut that up and turn it back into paint. So the better you mix it, the better your chances of not having a big dirt cloud of paint getting stuck in your airbrush. So we got those two. Those are our mixed paints. Now I'm gonna also use a little bit of this GW Air paint. I've got Abaddon Black and McCrag Blue. So I wanna have sort of a bluish tint to my shadows. I'm gonna go ahead and mix this up. And since this is airbrush paint, I think I can mix it right in my cup. So I'll pull my hose up using my Patriot 105. Make sure that sprays good. I'm gonna make sure my needle is pushed forward. It is. And what I'll do is take a couple little blobs of paint, put it in there. I want a really dark blue, so I'm gonna put like 3 brushfuls of blue and then 1 or 2 brushfuls of black. Let's start with 1 and mix it in. I don't normally mix in my cup unless it's inks or if I'm using airbrush ready paint. Even with the airbrush ready paint, sometimes it's better to mix in a salsa cup just to make sure there's no little dirt clods or anything of paint in there. So I'll mix this up really good. It's pretty dark, but it's a bluish shade, which is what I want. And I think we're ready to airbrush. Now, if you've never airbrushed before, a good practice step is to take a piece of paper like your napkin here, and first I just want to make sure paint's coming out on my piece of paper. So I got a couple sprays there. This is what my paint looks like at full, like pulling back all the way at 100%. So it's just this massive blast of paint, right? That's not what we want to airbrush. We want to airbrush in little 10 to 20% spurts. So a lot of times I'll practice doing a little 10% spray. and then put a little 10% spray on top of it. So I'm building up color 10% at a time. When I'm airbrushing, I'll do an motion like this. So I'm always, maybe the model's right here, I'm spraying off the model, I hit the model, and I spray off the model again. I'm always in a motion of getting off the miniature. So if I'm spraying, I'm not spraying like this, because this is, if something happens and I get a little clog and then it blows out, it will all be on the miniature. If I'm spraying in this motion, even if it blows out and a bunch of paint comes out, I'm in the motion of getting off the model. So for this Space Marine, and I think I sprayed all my paint. So let me put in some more of this blue. We'll get our color back. I don't need a whole lot because I'm only spraying one model. If I was spraying a whole bunch, I'd probably mix it up or find a darker blue. But I'd want to have enough paint to get through the job. So we'll mix this up again. Get it a little bit darker. Now we have kind of a dark black, like that. Now, here's the funny thing. Each color that I have is a single color. And if you notice, all my colors jump in value from each other. So this red is definitely different than this orangey red, and it's way different than this blue-black. So that lets me use the airbrush to blend between those colors. That's what I want. If these colors were too close, I'm not going to see the blend. So I want to have drastic changes in color. Now the other thing that I can do is I can make several different colors just out of this blue. So by spraying little 10% sprays, I can build up color, and each of these colors is now mixed with the black that my model is. I always start with a black base coat because I can use that as some of my shading for subsequent colors. So to start off with, my shadows, I always start with my shadows first, and I spray from a really low angle because your airbrush only sprays in a straight line. So it's just kind of similar to light. Light comes down in a straight line, it doesn't go around and hit the bottom, it just comes down in a straight line. So I'm actually spraying my shadows in a straight line up, so I'm hitting all the shadow areas. I'll also go up to about 90 degrees because I want that shadow area to go up into my midtones. If I don't do that, I run the risk of having my shadow turn to black and then turn to whatever my midtone is. So this would look really ridiculous if this guy was red, then black, then blue. So that being said, I'm going to spray from down below. And doing light sprays. Now your shadow color, you're never going to see very well the color go on. But that's okay. I can kind of see that the shininess of my primer is going away. So that means I've got a matte color on top of it, and that's what I want. So now I'll come up 90 degrees, spray again. And typically what I do, because I want you to see the top of the model better than the bottom, I put more, I add more shadow color to the top of the model. I also try to drop the model as many times as possible because that's what makes you a really good painter. Actually, it's true. Every single Golden Demon I've won, I've dropped the model at least twice and broken it. So, I don't know. It's just one of those things. You also want to make sure you get around the head, and maybe even in the chest a little bit. So we got a nice amount of blue. Now you're probably asking, why would you do blue shadows and not like a greenish red or something? Blue shadows actually look better on red, so, you know, kind of is what it is. I'm going to save the rest of this blue paint so I can dump it back into a cup. Maybe I'll need it later. And I use just a cup with paper towels in it as my washout tank. Spray a little bit of my thinning solution is also my cleaner. Spray it in, spray it out. I'm watching my spray to make sure it's nice and forceful. Looks like it did when it was brand new. That'll tell me if my nozzle is clogging or not. I always hold it back a little bit. If I hold it too close, it will still splatter paint out. So if I hold it back a little bit, not so bad. So that's good. The other thing you'll notice, I still have blue paint inside my cup. That's okay. I want the colors to kind of mix together naturally, just a little bit. Obviously, if I was going from red to white, I would clean out my airbrush thoroughly. So, but for this, I don't have time for that. We'll switch right to red. So I'm putting a big blob of red in there. The other thing you'll notice is I don't pour my paint in like this. I tend to take it in with a larger brush. And for whatever reason, I clog less when I do this. When I pour it in, I clog more. And I think it's because when I pick it up with the brush, it either doesn't pick up the little flecks of paint that are in there, or the flecks of paint end up sticking to the brush. I don't know what it is, but I've just noticed it over 10 years of airbrushing. I noticed that I clog less if I transfer the paint with the brush. That being said, don't use the tiniest brush ever to transfer your paints. Use a bigger brush. All right, so we got this. You'll notice my red spray is darker, but then as I keep spraying it, now it's lighter. The other thing you're gonna remember, when you load up your cup, only load it about halfway full at max, because when you're airbrushing, you start doing this, and I'm not thinking about my cup at all. And what happens if I get straight up and down, and that cup is over halfway full, I'm actually pouring paint out, and it's a big mess. So keep your cup halfway or less. And here we go with our mid-tone. So this is our mid-tone color. It's a very vibrant red. I'm gonna spray it at a 45-degree angle. I'm never gonna change that angle. If I have to change the model, I'll change the angle on my airbrush too. So 45-degree angle all the way around 360. So just with my first initial spray. So I'm gonna spray it like 10% sprays, and you'll see the model start to turn red, but just faintly. So the funny thing is, this is this color right here, sprayed on at 10% with a blue undercoat, actually looks burgundy. So I've created burgundy out of that red without doing anything but spraying just 10%. So now we start spraying even more. Keep moving around the model, and I can build up my color. So one of the things with red you may find is it's very hard to build up to a really bright base coat, like a really vibrant red. So I'm going to show you a trick here to make this red really pop. But first I want to get these first base coats on. Now the only time I break my rule of 45 degrees is if I get down into these legs and I gotta get in under weapons and stuff, I will move my angle so that I can hit those. So I'm hitting like the top of the leg over here. I'm gonna leave some shadow areas where the legs are bent down in. One thing with airbrushing that I see a lot of people do is they put a completely opaque layer all the way around, and that basically kills what your airbrush is good for. Your airbrush is good for painting in lights and shadows automatically. So if I just keep it at this angle and don't put a 100% layer on, I can get a nice transition between lights and shadows. So every once in a while I'll spray maybe from below just to kind of deaden that darkness a little bit. That's totally fine. And you'll see here later, after the next step, we'll have a really bright space marine. At the bottom of those legs, a lot of times space marines are running so the back of their legs are pushed out. The light would come down and hit that directly, so it's gonna be a really bright area on the model. Do the back of this backpack really nice, spray the helmet some more. Hit those arms, don't forget to hit this hand up here. And what I usually do is I'll spray the gun too. Now you might be asking, why am I spraying the gun? Because it's gonna be a different color. But what I'm doing right now is I'm building the light into the whole model. So I know where if I have like directional light, like if it's coming from this direction, hitting right there, I know that that's where the light should be hitting the weapon as well. In this case, we're just having it from the front, so I know the weapon's gonna get hit with light right in front as well. So right now it's red, but when I paint it a different color, I can follow that as a guide as to where my highlights and shadows are supposed to be on the weapon as well. Also, if I just get super lazy and I want to play with these guys just airbrushed, at least the weapon's painted. So it's all the same color, but at least it's painted. All right, so we've got our red on. I'm going to get rid of the rest of this paint. And now I'm going to show you a little trick on how to make this red really, really pop. So, spray this out. So I usually just spray the water in until it starts coming out clean, which means most of the wet paint has been knocked out. All that's left is some dry paint or dry-ish paint. I can tell from that spray that my nozzle is still not clogged, so we're good to go. I want to clean out the inside of this cup a little bit. So instead of using my brush and cleaning it out, what happens is if you're spraying a lot of miniatures, the paint will dry up on the inside of your cup. And if you wash it out with your brush, it will rehydrate it a little bit and it'll make a whole bunch of little flakes of paint that are partially dry, and they will actually clog your airbrush right off the bat. So I usually just use a paper towel and clean it out that way. Whatever doesn't come out is stuck in there for now. But none of that will hurt your airbrush. It's only stuck in the cup. So we'll spray this out. I'm going to do a little bit of a deep cleaning here because we're switching to white. So I'll pull my needle out and rub off any paint that's on it. Stick a little bit more water solution in there. My isopropyl alcohol distilled water. Just spray it out without a needle. I'm going to put this needle back in. Do one more spray. Now most of the red is out of there, almost all of it. So if any red mixes into this, it will be a very minute amount. So now I'll take some white paint, pour it into my cup. White is the thickest of all the paints. I'm just going to squirt in a little bit from my water bottle. I have to be careful not to put too much in. All right, so we're mixing up this white paint, and this will be our undercolor. Kind of like when they print T-shirts and they put on like a black T-shirt, and they'll put a white base underneath it and then put colors on top. So same technique, same idea. Get this, put our white in here. Now this is one of our colors that we might have to add more thinning solution because usually white comes out pretty speckly. But I'm spraying at 40 PSI, so who knows, maybe it will not be as speckly as I think it will be. So maybe I'll do a little test on the side of the base. That's actually pretty fine, perfect. So my 40 PSI is actually helping make this white paint be less speckly. So now I'm going to spray on the areas that I want the most extreme highlights and the best red. So I kind of want it everywhere. So my main light is coming down the middle. So I'm going to spray a little bit on the backpack, on the head, tops of these shoulder pads. Now I'm trying to leave as much of the red and the darker colors as possible because I want that contrast of really bright and really dark. Hit the hand, I'm going to hit the tops of these legs down here. And the tops of the shoes. So again, you see I'm putting those little 10% sprays down. Put some on this gun just to see what that looks like. That has a nice highlight on it. I'm going to do the back of the backpack at the top and these little nozzles on the side. That center plate. I'm not going to do anything on the bottom of the backpack. Tops of these legs. Backs of the feet. we'll hit light. So I try to spray the areas that I want either to be lit or to be interesting. So maybe I'll do the back of this little pad right here. There's one on the other side, so I'm going to do that too, up in the front. Kind of going down both sides of the legs, but I've kept the insides of the legs really dark. The crotch is really dark. I'll do the back side of this shoulder pad just a little bit and the top of the helmet a little bit more. So I'm just kind of going back over all the areas, making them more opaque. So now I'll come back in with the second layer of white and I'll just hit the areas I want absolutely the brightest. Not too concerned about the back of the model, more concerned about the front and these shoulder pads. These shoulder pads I want to be very powerful and really, really have like bodacious color. So we'll get that on there. The hand I think would be good to be really bright. The other hand, and then these knee pads will definitely get it at the top. And the feet. So I think that's good as far as the light goes. Maybe we'll go a little bit brighter on the back of these legs because they're so out from the body. I think the light would hit them really well. Maybe the top of this backpack. So just a little bit, not as much as the front. So now we have a really ridiculously looking red marine. I'm going to spray out my white. Again, we want to get all of this white out, so we're going to kind of do a deeper clean because we're going to go back to our red. But you see our spray is still really good. We know that that's clean nozzle. Good to go. All right. So I will take a paper towel, wipe out the inside. I really don't want this red to be pink, so we'll take our needle out. And spray this out. Put our needle back in. Tighten that down, and we'll just do one more spray. So we're good to go. I'm going to go ahead and check the tip of our needle to make sure there's no dry tip going on. I don't see any, so I think we're still good to go. All right, so we're going to switch back to our red paint. I'm going to put a little bit more water into it, or a little bit more of our thinning solution. Thin it down just a bit more, not a lot, but just a little bit, so it's a little bit translucent. So now we've got a solution that's a little bit thinner than our base coat solution. Add that to our pot. All right, so we're good to go. The paint is not pink, it's red. So now we're just basically gonna cover all this red, all the white areas. Maybe I can cover a little bit in the darker areas too. You can see that red's starting to be much more vibrant. I like it. So what I'm doing now is I'm kind of what's called insisting on color. I'm placing a color down and then airbrushing it, letting it dry and airbrushing over it with the same color over and over again. So you can even use your airbrush as a blow dryer. As long as you don't have paint coming out, you're good to go. So I can just spray it on there, kind of get those areas to dry really quickly, come back in and hit them again. All right, so he's dry. Let's insist on this red and let's make it a little bit redder in areas. So the areas I want the reddest are the prominent areas that I want you to look at. So the head, the shoulders, maybe the backpack, and maybe these knees. That's about it. So and maybe that hand too. Just be careful to be hitting at the same angle, this 45-degree angle. A little bit more on the back. You may also notice I leave the sides of the model a little darker, and that's on purpose because it gives you, when you're looking at the model directly on, it gives you more shape. It gets darker on the sides. It's almost like a cylinder effect. So I'm going to spray little bits of paint on the little nubs right there. And you can see, even with this Patriot 105, even though it's a general purpose airbrush, it does spray fairly fine little dots of paint. So the first probably 7 years of my career, I only used this airbrush. I didn't use any finer detail airbrush at all. And most of the reason for that was it just never clogged. Now let's take a look at this tip again. Now that we've got paint on it, you can see there's a little bit of red paint there. Just use the pads of my fingers and maybe like a little bit of my fingernails. Wipe that off. There's no bubbles in my cup, so I know that I'm not clogging anything. So that's the red. Now we'll clean this out. So you can see there's still red in the cup. We're going to take our lighter orangey red, load it into our cup. Spray out all that red. Now we're to like an orangey color. Now this color may not show up very well, but it will make a difference in our vibrancy of our highlight. So this color, I'm not going to spray everywhere. This color I'm only going to put in the pocket around the face, and that's pretty much it. Maybe if his gun was in a different position, I'd do it on the knee pad too, but everything's in shadow under him. So I'm only going to put it on the upper part of his body because that's the part I want to attract your attention to. So a little bit on the head, a little bit on the shoulder pads. Trying to stay sort of in the center though. Maybe a little bit on that chest area there. Come back where it dried and add a little bit more. Kind of blow dry it real quick. I think that shoulder pad should be a little bit brighter. So I'm gonna expand that orangey highlight. Same on this side, just a little bit bigger. And I'm gonna put a little bit on these little vents over here. All right, so I think that's good for that. Maybe a little bit on the hand. I'm constantly making judgment calls, and the more of these you do, the better you'll get at like eyeing where exactly to put the paint, where exactly to put the highlight. I usually start the highlight where I think it's gonna go, and then expand from there. So your first guess is usually right, and then you can just kind of be like, oh, I need it a little bit bigger, a little bit bigger. But now I've got a red Space Marine with kind of an orangish highlight, and I think he looks pretty cool right now. So that's the main base coat colors. Now, I want to add a little bit to my shadows. And how am I going to do that? If I put regular acrylic paints, like my main shadow color back on, which was this dark blue, it's a little bit matte. And the matte paint will actually look lighter than it actually is. I need something that's semi-gloss. So that's exactly where the inks come in. So let me put this airbrush aside. I'm gonna kind of clean it out. And when I'm not using my airbrush, but I don't want to clean it out really well, I just put a little bit of my cleaning solution in there, spray it, and then take it off and put it in my airbrush holder. Then I'll just switch to my Sotar 2020, and we're ready to go. All right, so for shadows, I think that this violet color will look really good in this red. They'll make a really good shadow color, and it gives it kind of a good guy feel. Just gonna pour a little bit of it in here. Inks are really, really, really thin, but they're really, really vibrant. See that little bit of paint? If I just spray like 10%, you can still see the purple. So that little bit of paint, if I spray a lot, it's ruined. So I'm just gonna put a little bit of paint. So to do this, I'm gonna put my reading glasses on so I can see better, because I gotta get up close and personal. Now remember, I'm at 40 PSI, so this is really strong airbrush, but I can still manipulate even on my hand and spray just 10%. I'm barely pulling back on the trigger, barely pushing down on the air, and barely pulling back on the trigger to just get that little bit of paint out. So now I can come in and I can drive my shadows down subtly in areas. Between the legs, up in the torso, maybe the bottom of this backpack a little bit by the vents. These top vents. Maybe a little bit of the bottom of this thing. I can use my thumb as a mask. I'm gonna spray that side of the backpack, turn it around, spray the other side. So now I got that cool little darker shade right there. I'm gonna spray into the crack right there. Now the nice thing with the airbrush, if you spray too much or you get too much of it on there, you can always come back with your mid-tone color and lightly knock it back. There's really no total screw-ups with airbrushing, unless of course you spray too hard. But doing these little 10% sprays is really the key to controlling how much shadow you put on the model. Again, I'm kind of keeping the sides of the model darker, so I'm gonna spray little bits of paint. A little bit goes a long way. See, I get that little shadow in the hand rolling back up. I can do the undersides of the knee pads just very carefully. Inside of these legs. There. So coming up to the upper part of the body, I can hit inside this torso, so maybe I want to mask off with my thumb and spray right inside. So more on the torso part of the body, just making it a little bit darker. Up in the helmet, I'm going to spray right back by the back of the eye. So I just experienced a little bit of a clog. I don't know what actually happened, but I will take off. Maybe I got a little bit of dry tip there. So I'm going to take off the nozzle cover. If I can. You can also see there's some bubbles in my paint. So that means I got a little bit of a clog going. So pull my needle back just a little bit so I don't damage that. Here's the other reason why you don't ever put your covers on too tight, because then they're really hard to get off. Okay, so I'll put my needle back in. Just want to make sure nothing's clogged around the outside of the needle. Put my nozzle cover back on. Okay, whatever it was, it's out. So, got that cleaned up. Now I'm gonna come back in, and it always pays when you're doing like really fine areas like this. Take your nozzle cover off, clean that needle off, and make sure there's no dry tip at all, because just a little bit will hurt you. And then now I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna try to hit right in the corner of that helmet spot right there. A little bit darker on that side. I'm going to do the other side. And I'm going to do the back of the helmet a little bit down towards the bottom. Just to darken it up a little bit, make it a little bit more contrasty. And this back part of the backpack. So I'm doing lots of little 10% sprays, just slowly building up the color. And then I can put right at the bottom of each shoulder pad a little bit. Just a little bit darker. So I build that up a little bit. So what we see here on the helmet, I actually screwed up a little bit. So I'm going to show you how to fix that. I'm going to spray out all my ink. Wash this out. Watch my spray, it's a perfect spray. Wow, this ink smells like blueberries. That's weird. Yeah, it's not peyote, it's blueberries. Okay, so I'm gonna take my mid-tone red color, and I really shouldn't be doing this with my Sotar, but I'm just going to spray regular acrylic paint through it. I only need a little bit to come out, and I don't care if it clogs really fast, because I just need to fix that one little area on the back of the helmet. So get that red coming out, and now I'm just going to push that shadow back just a little bit. Try not to have water dripping down your airbrush, because it will actually spray off. And there we go. I just fixed that. I'm going to add a little bit of this to the outside edges of this orange. Kind of bringing some of that red back so it's not too orange. So this took a little while because we were spraying just one model and working between colors, but you should be able to spray a model like this in about 2 minutes. So you get all your lights and shadows placed in, about 2 minutes per model. Obviously you're doing 20 or 30 at a time, but it's really cool. Now your next step would be to start base coating parts of the model, but you can always come back at any point in the process and airbrush more on top of that. So that's our main airbrushing for this stage of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got some information on how to airbrush out of this, and we'll see you next time.